King's Hawaiian. I wanted to just end our discussion on different methodologies because I think King's Hawaiian will lead us into our discussion on competitive advantage. So we were talking about different techniques marketers might use to understand customers. Okay. And we talked about, survey research, observational research. We talked a little bit about qualitative techniques and projective techniques. And I just wanted to touch on a few more things as it pertains to different qualitative techniques. Oftentimes you'll see marketers conduct focus groups. Have any of you also ever participated in a focus group? Do you mind sharing what it was on?
Okay, it was on employee experience at my former workplace. So we had the people in culture rep being the moderator.
Okay.
About 6 to 8 people, and then she would ask questions, and then open-ended questions, and then we would discuss. And yeah, pretty much.
Okay, great. So focus groups can be used for a variety of different topics. So she was talking about it from an employee standpoint. And so they can be used to assess like employee programs, employee issues, culture issues. They also can be used to look at, customers' feelings towards a product or a service or how they interact with the product or their perceptions of a brand. A variety of different things can be assessed with focus groups, and that's probably why they're oftentimes used in marketing research. But what a focus group is simply a group of people coming together. In this case, for marketing, we're talking about consumers. Maybe it's 6, maybe upwards of maybe 12. But usually think of a small group, and if we're hiring an external research firm, you'll have a trained researcher or moderator run that discussion, ask questions. And the point is that with a group setting like that, that sort of domino effect or exchange between the participants in the group will result in a richer or more informative discussion to the researcher than would asking each individual individually. So in other words, rather than doing one-on-one interviews, there's more benefit to the researcher by having that group discussion. So it's kind of like the idea of, I'm talking and I ask something and Mia raises a point and then Emma says, oh, that's a good point. What about this, this, this? It's like that, oh, well, thinking of this, it triggers this thought, or he said that, like just that exchange of information and the ideas that can be generated through just kind of hearing somebody else say something. So the richness of the group discussion is usually why a focus group is conducted. It also can be cheaper and faster than doing depth interviews. So depth interviews are those one-on-one interviews that a researcher might have with a participant. And so you got to think about the researcher has to usually go to the person's home or meet them at a certain location. They spend 45 minutes to an hour with that individual. And it just takes a lot longer than a focus group would take. So again, focus groups, you can have people interact with products too. At some research firms, there's like a one-way mirror where you might have your client on the other side or folks from, the client, it depends who, or other researchers behind the wall, watching what people are doing, how they're behaving, their facial expressions. And so ultimately they would be observing what happens in the focus group as well. So it's not just the researcher writing the report. Sometimes it could be the researcher plus whoever else on the research team is behind the wall watching. So you can have people interact with products, you can have them exposed to advertisements, lots of different ways they can be used. And so, again, that's the difference between a focus group and a depth interview. But at the end of the day, they're not going to produce generalizable results or as generalizable results like the type of data you would get from a survey. Because you're looking at a small group of people, and unlike where a survey, if you're conducting quantitative research, you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands of responses where you aim to project your results to your broader population and your broader target market. So there are some fallbacks, but oftentimes you'll see focus groups used in the early stages of product development. So sometimes when you do what's called concept testing, you're simply testing the concept of a new product. So you might expose, I had an example that I created, is let's say you could run this as a focus group or just an individual interview, but probably more appropriate for a focus group, is you might have a concept test for, let's just say, a new sports bar coming to the Auburn market. And you might say something like, you would read the description, so think of the 4 Ps, and say, and ultimately ask, like, do they like it? Would they use it? What are their thoughts on it? And so you might ask, okay, there's a new sports bar coming to the Auburn market. Here is, for instance, a sample menu, the different types of appetizers or food, main courses, desserts, drink menu at these different price points. This is where it would be. We're considering locating it on the corner of, let's say, Shug and North Donahue. And so you kind of give them the 4 Ps. So then you ask them, their thoughts on it. Simply, do they like it? Would they dine there? What do they like about it? What don't they like about it? How do they feel about the menu? And the idea of the concept test is simply to get participants' reactions to the idea before the company invests resources any further than this in terms of product development or moving forward, with further research costs or manufacturing costs or any other additional expense from this new concept or new offering. And so concept tests are oftentimes used or conducted using focus groups. I should also say, in thinking back to these different projective techniques we talked about, is that sometimes you'll see these techniques, such as a sentence completion task or a free association task. Any of these projective techniques we talked about might be used as sort of an icebreaker to make people feel comfortable in the focus group. Because what happens? When you're comfortable, you're likely going to divulge more information, right? When you think you're in a safe setting. That's one of the reasons why a researcher might turn to a depth interview instead of a focus group. When you think the topic is something like a sensitive topic that people might not feel comfortable talking about in a group setting, then a researcher might lean towards depth interviews over focus groups. And I'll give you an example. I once had a friend who did research on like high potent painkillers. Okay, think about, those sorts of medications. So anyhow, a lot of people didn't feel comfortable talking about those issues in a group setting, and so she turned to do depth interviews instead. So you can see how there are certain topics that people are more comfortable with talking about in a group setting compared to those other topics where a group setting is not appropriate. So you need to keep that in mind too as a researcher, is what's going to produce the most valid results, and also be the type of environment where your participants feel comfortable and willing to divulge or share information. Okay, so we talked about concept testing, talked about focus groups and depth interviews, and I had these slides on here too, just because I think this is an old commercial that I thought was so funny, and it's an example of what a focus group will be about. If you Google AT&T, I forget the name of this campaign, you'll see some ads for them, and I think it's funny because it shows the kids like sharing all sorts of crazy ideas. At the end of the day, though, like I said, with focus groups, you can't produce generalizable results. What you might do as a researcher is you might begin your research by conducting a focus group or depth interview, to unveil ideas that could be tested in a survey or some sort of quantitative design. So for example, with qualitative research, oftentimes all you can do is identify themes or the occurrence of certain themes of what people are saying and quantify the presence of those themes. But keep in mind that when you're talking about 6 to 12 people in a group, your percentage of people who are saying comments that align with a certain theme is likely not necessarily representative of your population or your total target market. So for example here, let's say the researcher asked participants about their drinking habits, and they asked them what brand of beer that they drink, and then why do they drink that brand of beer. In this case, let's just say you had 15 participants, which is larger than a typical focus group, but you had 15 participants and these are the reasons that are indicated. What you then could do is paste them into themes, and I color-coded this, but you see themes of taste, you see, headaches, stomach aches, so like kind of illnesses represented as another theme. You see social effects, so friends, spouses, wives, guys at work. Okay, so that's sort of social reason. You see loyalty in the purple, taste in the red, right? So, and then we have price as gray here. So you could technically quantify and say 2 out of 15 participants mentioned price, or X number of participants mentioned taste. But again, when you're talking about such a small sample, it's likely not, you can't really draw too many inferences here. So what you might do then is then launch a survey to a larger sample, so hundreds to thousands, whatever, and ask people, to what extent do you buy this beer because of its price, its taste, its how it makes you feel, or because your friends or family drink it. And then you can more so quantify the extent to which why people are buying this particular brand of beer. Does this make sense? Okay, so quantitative research has its value and the benefits, in terms of projections there. Qualitative research too has its value by unveiling themes or unveiling reasons to buy or unveiling consumers' emotions, things that you oftentimes can't discover in survey research. So with that said, I just wanted to finish our discussion there on that and bring on the King's Hawaiian group, which will lead us then into our discussion on competitive advantage. So, Kevin and crew, come on down. I have you up here somewhere. There we go. Yep, you're taking me out. We're good. Okay. Floor is all yours.
Do the clickers work?
I think they do.
They're clickers. Yeah.
Hi everyone, good morning. How are you all doing today? We'll be presenting on the case King's Hawaiian. My name is Antonia Wani, and with me are my colleagues Jonas Lang, Tucker Montgomery, and Kevin Hill. Here's the outline for our presentation. We'll start by providing a brief overview of King's Hawaiian, then dive into identifying problem statement and the situation analysis for this case. From there, we'll present our awareness and findability plan, followed by growth strategies, expected outcomes, and we'll open the floor for questions and contributions if there are any. King's Hawaiian. It is a family-owned premium bakery brand founded in 1950 and is mostly known for its sweet rolls, which accounts for about 80% of its sales. It also has other products like the hamburger buns, the Hawaiian food, their sauces, hot dogs, just to mention but a few.
this brand is one that is also strongly associated with events, special occasions, holidays, which we've seen from the case, and research has provided certain utilitarian and hedonic benefits to their consumers. Things to also mention is that they are known for their distinctive packaging, their crown logo, and also bright colors. You've seen a lot of bright colors during this presentation. Two other things to mention is that they use a frozen to thaw method of distribution to maintain freshness of their products during nationwide distribution. And they are mostly found in the dairy and bakery section rather than the main bread aisle, which leads us to the problem statement. Because they are mostly known for premium reputation, loyalty, special occasions, we've decided to frame this problem statements into three, or categorize them into three: findability, positioning, and portfolio awareness. Specifically asking questions around, number one, how can the brand become more relevant for everyday meals, top of our consumers' minds without losing their premium image? Number two, how can King's Hawaiian make its bonds easier for shoppers to find where they've already shopped? And three, portfolio awareness. How can we as consultants help King's Hawaiian to increase awareness and usage of their full product portfolio, even beyond the dinner rolls? I would pass it to my colleague Jonas to take it up from here.
Thank you. So to start out with, we're going to be looking at a sort of some situation analysis of some of the factors that are going on at King's Hawaiian. Some of the strengths that they have are they have a very strong brand and presence. They are very clearly seen as one of the top quality in the market compared to like St. Pierre's or Martin's. They do have distinct packaging and placement. They have their own still separate rack. I'm sure some people have been gotten by walking by the deli and go, "Ooh, those look good." I have. So they also have, they're separate from, they're not just seen as bread, they are in the premium or specialty category in the bread market. They also have their unique frozen delivery model. There are some drawbacks that we'll talk about a little bit. But they also have partnerships with their quick service restaurants like Arby's. They have their burgers and sliders that you can get with the King's Hawaiian products. And they are based in the U.S., which makes things a little easier for shipping to the U.S. So for some weaknesses, they are primarily, most of their money does come from their rolls, 8% of that. And there are limited awareness. They are struggling with raising awareness of some of their non-roll products, like their hot dog buns and their hamburger buns. And next, they are more expensive than their competitors, which some people, if they're economically struggling, may not want to be just by spending money on a fancy roll. They also do struggle sometimes with findability, so they are not in the bread release rolls on the bread aisle. So people try to look for the King's Hawaiian rolls and go, I don't see them, I'll get something else. And there are also limits for the frozen delivery service on the sort of direct to consumer. It's a little expensive to ship frozen direct to consumer compared to just from like the warehouse or something to a store. That's a little more expensive than just like I'm going to use FedEx to send something to your house. So opportunities for growth, there are, as mentioned earlier, they do struggle with awareness. So there is room to grow and become more aware of their products, as well as expanding their demographic reach. They are primarily sold to baby boomers and Gen X, so there is room to grow in the younger generations. There are additional opportunities to expand in sort of the barbecue, burger, hot dog market, whether it's like partnerships through football stadiums or something like that. There are rooms there's room to grow there. There is also room to grow internationally. There are drawbacks to that, as well as there's also room to grow in their online platform with additional online partnerships. Some threats they have is that if everybody in the world decided to go to gluten-free, they'd be out of business. So low-carb trends and gluten-free trends can sort of upset some of their success. They're also, again, price-sensitive. For price-sensitive customers, they may not be the best choice, or they may be hard to justify buying that extra price. They also are seen as occasion-only spendings, so not necessarily year-round. It's like a typical Monday or whatever, I'm going to go get King's Hawaiian rolls. And again, they are selling to a older customer base. So again, just to emphasize some of the demographic and economic pressures that they are experiencing, most of their buyers in 2021 were the older generations. There are also expectations of the expected expenses for like a Thanksgiving sale. Most customers, they're the most customers that spend the most money during those on food and like decor are the younger generation. So there's definitely room that we need to grow there. Some key factors to consider heading into the rest of this presentation. We want to make sure that we maintain our share of the sort of less money spent in the older generations. They don't spend as much, but we want to be a part of that and maintain our presence in their traditions and keep our sort of unique positioning in the deli market or deli area and bakery areas of stores. And we also want to maintain, again, be a part of traditions, because then while older generations may spend your primary customer, eventually younger generations will become a part of that, and we want to become a part of their traditional events. We want to become a sort of classic that they have at their household. Last but not least, we do recognize and want to improve our presence in the younger generations. I'm going to pass it on to Tucker. Thank you.
All right, so how can we grow the brand by becoming more easily accessible? So we've conducted a 5-step plan that will make us become with our awareness and findability. The first one being a research-led placement decision that'll begin with a field experiment. Then we're going to improve in-store findability without taking away the premium positioning that we have. Thirdly, we're going to expand awareness of secondary products. So like we've talked about, going beyond just the dinner rolls and going to sliced bread, hot dog buns, etc. Fourth, we're going to increase purchase frequency among customers that we already have. And finally, improving our retail media and suggested add-ons at the point of decision. So first one, we have the research-led placement strategy. So we will begin with the field experiment and test our bread aisle placement for buns and our other breads throughout the store, and we will have true evidence that'll give us the best results, and we can make decisions based on patterns and attention points from there. Secondly, improving our in-store findability. From a personal experience as a consumer, I am very impulse buying when it comes to Hawaiian rolls specifically. Like, I know from my experience, if I'm hungry, then I'll go get, a pub sub or something at the store, and what do you know, in the corner there's King Hawaiian rolls, and that's going to be really the only time that I buy them. So making it more available all over the place, whether it's signs or aisle cues, wherever there may be, to make it more obvious and not just be something that is impulse buying or something that's just season peaking. Third, we'll expand our awareness beyond secondary products, like we have said, going beyond just rolls and the special occasions at certain barbecues or wherever it may be, going beyond that. Fourth, we'll do our retail media and suggested add-ons, so it can increase visibility at the moment of purchase, whether that's on Facebook, Twitter, wherever it may be, to making it more aware on different type of grocery apps alongside items that we already have relevant, and improving our discoverability and encouraging purchase to active shopping decisions. And finally, increasing our purchase frequency among loyal customers. So rather than focusing on getting new customers, we need to stick to what we already have so we can deepen our loyalty among our current buyers and educate them in their households for a full product range besides going beyond just the roles that we already have and getting more popular with our other products. So we'll now pass it on to Kevin.
All right, so now let's look at the idea for us to grow King's Hawaiian. So what we noticed and what was said in the case is the problem is that people don't know King's Hawaiian have other products other than the rolls. But when they find out and they try them, they love them. So our goal is to just promote their current product line significantly better. Now, one of the ways we want to do this is we want to focus on 3 products in particular, their hot dog and hamburger buns, as well as their sliced bread. So one example actually of this expanded product line that people don't know about is this right here is the King Hawaiian French toast pack that they have online, where they sell it, where they have the bread, the coconut milk, coconut syrup, and all of that in an attempt to, you want to make some French toast, they have an entire set for you. But people wouldn't know that. So one of the ways we want to focus on that is what we call like the summer fun idea. So as we discussed earlier about findability, about moving things, the rack and the distinctive product, how it's presented, and the brand in itself is great. So one of the ideas we had was during summer months, possibly putting a second rack over by where the hot dogs and hamburgers are. Anecdotally, when I have been to Publix, one of the things that I've seen that they've done is that they have their own store brand brioche buns next to where the hot dogs and hamburgers are. So if you're already getting hot dogs or hamburgers, instead of going to the bread aisle and searching for buns or whatever, you buy those that are right next to it. So we would work with the grocery stores to have a second branded Hawaiian or King's Hawaiian branded rack over in that area. Now the idea is that this is a broad target and most broad population target, mostly looking to improve on those impulse buys. If it's there and you see it and you're already getting hot dogs and hamburgers, it's easier for you to just grab the King's Hawaiian rolls. And again, that goal for that is to have that in the summer months. So starting in May and ending around like Labor Day, trying to push that. Then, youth engagement. So, we want to believe in an expanded social media marketing blitz. Mostly focusing on the idea of there are lots of King's Hawaiian recipes that they have. This is actually one of them, which is the Monte Cristo sandwich using their sliced bread. And the idea is to have these recipes available for younger people on Instagram Reels and TikTok to get them to see how they can use King's Hawaiian rolls in their everyday life. We've talked about how most of the consumers right now are baby boomers and Gen X, mostly buying these rolls for Thanksgiving. The idea would then be to get in front of younger people, you know. Gardner's not on TikTok, but a lot of the other people in the class are. I'm not on TikTok either, Gardner. But the idea is to aim for younger people and get them excited and seeing things like how you make a Monte Cristo sandwich, how you can do the French toast. And this actually is something similar to what they're already doing now with the expanded partnerships with universities. There is already a King's Hawaiian branded area on Auburn University, over in the in the Tiger Zone. And they actually had a King's Hawaiian activation on campus less than a week ago, where they went, I think it was during the queuing for the Alabama game, and they gave out, that was the sweet rolls with vanilla icing and cinnamon on top, along with some different swag. So the opportunities is to get then young people aware of this brand so that they can think about it beyond, again, just Thanksgiving. What can we do with King's Hawaiian in our everyday life? So those are ideas for what we would recommend for them to do marketing-wise to grow. If that's all we have, we're now opening the floor to any questions and thoughts. Thank you. Yes, Michael?
Do they sell that sliced bread everywhere, or is it only select locations?
No, it's actually everywhere. They sell the sliced bread. Of course you have it, because it's in the rack. Because I've noticed actually too, going to the different Krogers and whatnot, is the bread is underneath where the rolls are. So the rolls are like chest eye level. The other products are a little lower. That's why we've talked about moving into another place to get people to look at them.
So tell us a little bit more about the research that you had mentioned doing a control where a control is where you're not changing placement, right?
Mhm.
That's what you intended, versus the store environment you were going to manipulate. So tell us a little bit more about like how you were going to change what you think in terms of placement, and tell me all the ins and outs of what you envision that study looking like.
Wait, can you say that again?
Basically,
Just tell me more details about how you're gonna run this placement testing. Like you said, comparing test and control stores to measure sales and like.
I think this was the idea of the secondary rack in certain locations to test whether or not we are going to see a more of a drive to these buns. And so we could either focus it, I don't think we had really thought specifically what markets to test this in particular. I think we did talk about seasonality though, of the idea of trying this in the summer and seeing if this drives the hot dogs and hamburgers.
So then though, how is your store environment different? What does the test store look like compared to the control store? What are you changing in the
The
test store?
additional rack of hot dog and hamburger buns.
I think we're not gonna do, it would all be live, it would just be different stores we would try it and not in specifically a test. So like we would have the secondary rack in the closer to the bread aisle, closer to these hamburgers and hot dogs.
Oh, okay, so buy
Yeah.
the meat versus the control stores not
Which is
having the
just, we're
secondary
just
rack?
in the we're just in the deli, yeah.
Okay.
So it's more of putting another rack in a
Yeah.
different place, seeing if that brings those products up.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have just a thought too. If you go back to you had talked about your targeting like the hot dog buns, the hamburger buns,
Mhm.
and running
Yes,
it
no.
through Labor Day, I think you had mentioned.
Yeah, that was,
Something to think about too is Labor Day is like the kickoff for football season.
Right.
So like tailgating, all the things, right?
Mhm.
Football, NFL, college football. So that date might actually be like a running, you
yeah,
know, potentially run later through fall.
it felt more of a like less firm and more of just like that's kind of a set summer season of between like Memorial Day and Labor Day to see if we're still driving because then it can expand like you said further because right now where they're gonna make their sales are like the bigger family meal days, so like Thanksgiving, Christmas, and like Easter. So we're just trying to see if we can drive some more growth in that like summertime.
Yeah,
as well.
outside of their holiday market, yes.
Mhm.
So, because I also think too, these are not very healthy, right? At least my perception. I'm not the doctor here, but they're not very healthy, and I don't associate tailgating food as healthy food.
Fair.
So to me, there's a connection there. Or grill it, yeah. So
Mhm.
anyhow, okay, cool. What else? Yeah, you got one for them.
I'm just curious, like you talked about their social media strategy. Like what is it now compared to what you want it to be? Like are they just pretty like are they out on social media? Are they active? Like are they engaging? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, this is real. This is not a mock.
Okay. No,
So-
yeah.
Oh no, so like they're doing stuff. They do have recipes and they have some TikToks with those recipes. Cause I've looked it up, but it's not a large.
So it's not like a full-fledged campaign, right? now?
No, this is kind of one-off stuff.
Okay.
And so to me, the idea would be we organize it better
Gotcha.
and have more of a sustained push because they have a website full of recipes. They don't have a TikTok full of recipes.
They look very good too. We got hungry looking at them.
I would say I have a sliders recipes using those. And it's really good. So.
Thank you for your business.
You're welcome.
Well, the French toast and cinnamon rolls y'all talked about sound great too.
That was the first thing I saw and I was like, I actually picked a lot of these pictures while I was hungry. So I was like, okay, what makes me excited and interested? So yeah, it was just, but when you think of King's Hawaiian, you think of the rolls and maybe some sliders, but not all of the other products.
Anything else? No? Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, is anyone in here reading the Red Marketing book for your course project?
Which one is that?
It's Red Marketing, like
It's like for my-
relevance, ease, and distinctiveness. Is no one in here assigned that book? Well, okay, hopefully someone in the online group is. Because when I read this case, the King's Hawaiian case, and again, I hope you all read it, because at a minimum, you should be reading every case. But what comes to, when I read this case and when I think about it, I think that it largely aligns with the Red Marketing book that, again, hopefully someone in the online audience is reading. And so Red stands for relevant. Is your product relevant to consumers? Is it culturally relevant? Is the product aligning with consumers' needs? So that's what R stands for, relevance. Ease. Is it easy to find? Is it easy to buy? Is it easy to use? Okay, so that to me is another issue. So is it relevant to consumers? Is it easy to find? We talked about those issues as it pertains to Hawaiian or King's Hawaiian. And then lastly, is it distinctive? What makes your product unique from a competitor? You know, and so how is it different? How does it stand out in a positive way? And so to me, this case really aligns with the Red Marketing book, and unfortunately, none of you in here are reading it, but I do think it's a great read. So if you have downtime this summer, you might be interested in. Okay, one other thing I wanted to mention with the case too is, let's see here, I printed it out. In the back, it gives, let's see, oh, yep, okay. So when you look at the case and you're looking at Exhibit 6, okay, here. So for the online group, I'm going to test this out and see if this works. So, doing anything? Oh, yay, okay. That's not what we want. Okay. One thing I want to bring your attention to is they give this Exhibit 6, and this is a perceptual map. Oftentimes, marketers might engage in perceptual mapping to understand how consumers perceive different brands that are in the market. And you demonstrate how they're perceived along two different dimensions. In this case, they're looking at price and quality. Personally, I don't think this is that great of a perceptual map because there's typically, as you can see, a more linear relationship between price and quality. So lower the price, lower the quality, higher the price, higher the quality. So you kind of do see a somewhat of a linear association here. But the point of perceptual mapping is really to help figure out how consumers perceive you and the competition. So here they demonstrate that King's Hawaiian is more associated with those brands up there, given it is in that upper quadrant of being higher price, higher quality. Where down here, these aren't, they're still competitors, but not to the same degree as those other brands. But why perceptual mapping not only is beneficial to look at how customers perceive you compared to competition, is it also might identify some gaps in the marketplace. So are there, an opportunity where we can, perhaps develop new products or new brands or sub-brands that operate in the white space? In this case, it's probably not possible. Because sometimes while these white spaces exist and they may present opportunities for brands, it's very unlikely that in this case, when you're looking at quality and price, to provide a high quality, low price item. You know what I'm saying? Because typically those two, like I said, it's that linear association. So in this case, the white space may not be as relevant because it's just really, it's oftentimes not possible to produce an offering with that sort of combination of attributes. But sometimes you might use a perceptual map to map other dimensions besides price and quality. You might be using it to assess certain features like the sportiness of a car. If I think back to those photo sorts I gave, and showed images of, I think it was GMC that was conducting that study. But anyhow, perceptual maps can be used in a variety of different ways, but they do have value for those reasons I just indicated. So you might see these come up in different cases throughout the rest of the term, but I did want to bring that to your attention since it is something that we see marketers do. Let's see, I think that's all I really wanted to share about the case right now. I also think, too, that I think it's a great example of a penetration strategy. If we go back to that product market growth matrix that I shared with you, Drew they're definitely talking about targeting their current customers and getting their current customers to buy more. So King's Hawaiian is going to bring us into talking about competitive advantage. And one of the things I will say about Chapter 4 is it talks about things we've already talked about in this book, or what you've read in this book already, and what we've talked about in class. And so I think we can cover some of these issues pretty quickly. So I will say that, and like you also mentioned it's a management course you're all taking where you talk about SWOT analysis and strategy. Some of this information will be consistent with that as well. I wanted to give you one other framework or example of King's Hawaiian, and particularly as it relates to strategy and thinking about some of you who are completing the marketing plan project. Because at this point, when I pull up the project, for those of you who are doing a marketing plan versus the book project, is that if you look at this, okay, again, each group is supposed to tackle sections 1 through 5. If you are assigned a marketing plan for your course project, you can tackle the executive, well, I would hold off on the executive summary, but you can tackle section 2, section 3, wherever that is. Okay, so the customer environment, the external environment. And right now we're talking about a SWOT analysis. We've already talked about it to a little bit. And now we're down to section F. So you're a good chunk of the way there. And so again, I don't want you guys waiting last minute to complete this course project. So hopefully you are making lots of progress, because you really could be about halfway there at this point. So here's another example. I wanted to mention this to you. There is a researcher at the Kellogg School of Management who creates what's called the G-Stick framework. You can Google it and explore it. I'm not going to test you on it, but it's very similar to what your book talks about. Your book intertwines some of these a little bit, but overall it's the same sort of approach. And so I wanted to give you just another example, is with the King's Hawaiian case. You could have a goal like this. If you're coming up with a marketing strategy for King's Hawaiian, you might have a goal that's to increase brand revenue by 18% over 24 months, with 30% of growth coming from non-roll products. Now, if you remember back to our earlier discussion, we talked about goals versus objectives. Goals, as far as the text that you're reading in this course, are often more subjective, where objectives are measurable. So in the G-Stick framework, this is probably more in line with what your book calls as an objective, okay? Because you can see that it's measurable, it's specific, and time-bound, okay? But it tells you what the company is striving for. And so when we talk about this in terms of a marketing strategy, we got to think about how we're going to accomplish that goal. And that's what marketing strategy is all about. And so here we can go, this is just an example, is to position King's Hawaiian as the sweet premium bread brand that elevates everyday meals. And so the idea is to get people thinking about it beyond just holiday meals, okay? And how are we going to compete? And so you can think of strategy as answering how are we going to win, okay? Are we going to make that goal come to fruition? And so it says we're going to compete on warmth and taste, not price. Okay. Because again, I know we talked about this with Bath & Body Works. I gave an example with the Wall Street Journal talking about how Bath & Body Works is going to eliminate through less in promotions. It's because you can train your customers to be price conscious. Not necessarily a great thing for a brand. And we're gonna expand usage occasions, okay? So that's how that's the overall key strategy. Now, the G-STICK framework breaks down strategy into tactics, which are more specific, aspects of your strategy. And so tactics as they relate to your 4 Ps. And so here again, just could be some examples. So expanding to slider buns for tailgating and entertaining. Launch a new line, breakfast sandwich rolls, which do they have these now or no?
The seasonal beverage or the
Do they have breakfast sandwich rolls?
Not in
No.
particular, they have pretzel buns and like pretzel bites.
Okay, so this would be a new product for them, okay? And add limited time seasonal flavors, again, potential new product. And so you see the tactics are more specific on the overarching strategy. And you would have that tactics for promotion, okay? Tagline, recipe contest, partnerships, place, okay? What they're gonna do, where they're gonna sell them, how they're gonna change out the store design, okay? Price, mention no change to price. You might run trade promotions, but I didn't mention that in here. Your implementation is your how, and should give a lot more information, such as, think of your implementation as your execution plan. Who's gonna be responsible for what, okay? And by when and with what resources. So it could be things like product development. Certainly if you're creating a new product, you've got to develop it. It probably will take more than a quarter, so it's probably, if this was your implementation plan, that probably would be the finalization of it. Retailer selling meetings, that's getting your retailer on board with selling new products. So when you talk about, I can't remember if Gordon talked about this or not, but when you're talking about, let's just say consumer packaged goods, going to the grocery store. If you're a new product that's going to be put on primetime shelves at the store, the retailer or the grocer is kind of taking a risk, right? Because they could make, if they know, for instance, that it's the Super Bowl, and if they have an end cap full of Tostitos, that's going to be a success because people are buying chips for Super Bowl weekend. And so they're making money, obviously, by increased sales and the sales resulting from that end cap placement. If they're going to devote that special shelf placement to a new product that they don't know how it's going to perform, they could lose out on sales if the product's not successful. So when you're developing a new product like this, like a consumer packaged good or a bread roll, you're likely going to have time to devote to selling to retailers to get them on board with buying your product. And oftentimes retailers will have what's called slotting fees, or fees that basically say, or have the manufacturer pay for that shelf space, or essentially if the product does not sell as anticipated, like if it doesn't meet like a minimum amount of sales, there's a fee that gets paid to the retailer, okay, that the manufacturer has to pay. So those meetings are oftentimes very critical so that the manufacturer can actually have these products purchased by the grocer or purchased by the retailer. Q2 would be when you actually launch the expansion, the digital campaign. Q3 would be the tailgating push, and then Q4, holiday reinforcement. Now again, this is further implementation. Talking about who's responsible, so you've got your brand team, your sales team, your digital tracking team, and information on budget allocation. Again, this implementation though in the real world would be a lot more detailed here, okay? Again, looking at all the details on who's doing what, by when, and with what budget. And lastly, I wanted to mention some control metrics. So you're talking about measuring sales by product category. How are your new items performing? How are they performing relative to your existing products? What's the repurchase product rate? Are people buying again? Are they not just trying, right? Because if you're a variety seeker like me, I'm open to trying new things, but just because I buy it once doesn't mean I'm going to buy it again. Okay, so looking at repurchase rates, looking at the expansion metrics. Where are people buying these products from? Where are they grabbing them from? What shelf? And then also brand tracking. So if the goal is to get people to think of King's Hawaiian outside of just your holiday roll, you might do some brand tracking studies to look at when people think of King's Hawaiian, what do they think of? Is the brand actually changing customer perceptions of the brand? So you might be running those studies concurrently as well. So this is, again, I wanted to just give you another example of how a marketing strategy actually aligns with implementation and control metrics. Because again, your control metrics here need to be relevant to your goal. That way it'll alert you to whether or not you need to adapt your strategy. Okay? Any questions about that? Again, I'm not going to, you don't need to know the G-STIC framework specifically. I just wanted to point it out because it is another way of thinking about these things. And it is pretty similar to what we've been talking about in class and with what you've been reading in your textbook. So let's talk a little bit about competitive advantage and strategic focus. This ultimately is what should be, when we're talking about your competitive advantage, is what should be exploited in your marketing plan. Okay, so we're going to talk about a SWOT analysis very briefly because we've already talked about it. We're going to talk about competitive advantage. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about product portfolios. So a SWOT analysis. It's one way to organize information. Remember, your strengths and weaknesses are internal to the firm. Your opportunities and threats are external to the firm. The firm cannot control those opportunities and threats. And so I want to say this again, and I'm going to say it again. Be careful when you do a SWOT analysis that you're making sure you've got the right things in the right boxes. Because oftentimes I see things that a brand can control in those opportunities and threats. Opportunities and threats are external to the company, folks. Okay? So those are the forces working for or against it. Okay? So keep those separate. And so the idea is you want to capitalize on your strength and then exploit an opportunity. You want to build on the good. Okay? And I think a great example of a company I think who does that really well is Apple. I remember way back, do y'all remember Napster, or is this before your time? You guys know what Napster was? Okay. Does anybody want to explain it to the class?
You could torrent music from Napster. So it's like, it was essentially like online piracy for music.
Yes. Okay, so.
Yeah, file share.
But it indicated like people didn't want to buy a whole CD at the time, right? There were certain songs that people liked. And so I think Apple iTunes saw this opportunity of, okay, people oftentimes prefer just a single song. Let's come up with an opportunity of offering Apple iTunes that allows people to get that single song legally. So great opportunity, was a huge success for them. And so, it was something the company could do. They had the technology in place or could acquire it and make it happen in a legal way. So, some other tips, things we've talked about before. You want to do, oftentimes, you run or conduct a SWOT analysis for each product and market combination. So if you're thinking of a big company, we're talking about GMC, right? You've got different vehicles targeted at different people. So you're going to run a SWOT analysis probably for each product line that you offer in that case, since they're targeted towards different markets. Take the customer's perspective. Largely, branding and customer things are perceptual and often not aligned with reality. When I worked at Target many years ago, I remember we had this meeting talking about all the things that were cheaper at Target than at Walmart. Like, they were cheaper at Target than Walmart. but what's the customer perception? That Target's more expensive, okay? So you've gotta keep that in mind. You gotta kind of separate perception from fact, but really to customers, perception is real, okay? Their perception is what matters. We've talked about identifying causes, not symptoms before. If you remember, I had that iceberg image up. Okay, looking at what is truly causing either the good thing or the bad thing. You know, what's causing the problem or what's causing sales to be high. Here are some questions when conducting a SWOT analysis. Is again taking the customer's perspective. What do they believe about us? What do they think about us? Remember, earlier I think I talked about different types of controls or metrics that marketers may look at. And while financial statements are critical, right, if we're talking about sales, revenue, things of that sort, typically something precedes that purchase. Whether it's a customer's attitude, their perceptions of the product value, their in-store experience, their mood state when they bought. And so sometimes it's important to think about those more subjective assessments because they're what actually those assessments are what results in the purchase. Okay. Another example of that is typically satisfaction precedes repeat purchase intentions. Okay, so getting that customer to buy again. So are they satisfied with the product? Okay, looking at what are the weaknesses that the company might experience. What are those trends in the external environment and how do they affect customers? You know, even though, you know, do customers really think the economy is doing well or not? You know, what's their perception? And how important are these issues? Obviously, you want to be focusing on the issues that are most important to the customers, not necessarily to the company. You're also going to be looking at resources. There's a wealth of different resources that can be causing the company to do well, or maybe it's resources the company lacks, and that's because of that, it can't execute on its strategy. I want you to take, for example, thinking about Walmart, because nearly everybody shops at Walmart. Think about the resources that Walmart has that allows it to execute on its strategy. Lots of different resources that allows that company to be, what's its tagline again? Something like saving better.
Save money, live better.
Save money, live better, is that it?
I think so.
Yeah, save money, live better. Way to go. So ultimately, if you think about how it can execute and live up to that tagline, think about the resources that it has and that it can exploit. So financial resources, pretty self-explanatory, intellectual resources, legal resources, human resources, organizational resources. Informational resources. Okay, Amazon has a lot of informational resources. Look at all the information it has on its customers. Okay? Insight resources, data sources, relational resources. Okay? Again, these can be strategic partnerships. Walmart has a lot of those. Okay? Reputational resources. These are all resources that might appear in a SWOT analysis under strengths or potentially weaknesses. Okay? If it's relevant to the strategy being made, if it's relevant to customers, it should be on there. Now, this is just an illustration I pulled from the book. This is simply an example of what a SWOT analysis might look like. So again, you can see these resources appearing on the weakness or the strength side. And again, if it's positive, you want to capitalize on what your company has. And your marketing strategy should, utilize those resources to help it achieve its goal. Now again, opportunities and threats. These are just some examples but again, all external to the company that the company cannot necessarily control. Do you read about Michael Porter in your other class? Yeah, so I figured I had to have a quote up about competitive advantage from Michael Porter. Now I want to point out one thing in this little quote here is talk about, well, I'm going to point out a couple things. So he talks about competitive advantage growing from value. Okay, going back to our value equation that we talked about from the very beginning. Value equals benefits minus what? What? Cost, yeah, right? So what are you giving up and what are you getting? So here it says value stems from either lowering the cost, right? Or increasing those benefits. And ultimately value will result in competitive advantage. And again, benefits are not just utilitarian, right? Those practical functional benefits. There's also experiential or hedonic symbolism type benefits that are very important to consider. Okay, so we have to think about the value equation. What are customers getting? What are they seeking? What are they getting versus what are they giving up? So there's lots of different sources of competitive advantage. Okay, if we think about the different types of value, so to say here, and many are listed here on this slide. But again, if we think back to Walmart, which of these competitive advantages are relevant to Walmart's strategy, its marketing strategy? What has it allowed Walmart to do well?
Distribution.
Which one? Okay, pricing advantage, distribution.
Promotional.
Maybe promotional. But definitely to the first two that you all called on, right? Distribution and pricing. Because look at its network of support, network of stores, its suppliers, and as a result, it also has a pricing advantage. Okay. So it exploits this with the strategy that we see the company utilize today. Typically, what you'll see is, depending on the source of competitive advantage, companies usually operate using one of three types of strategies. They either compete on operational excellence, which is efficiency in operations and processes. And usually because of that efficiency, what is happening to their prices? They're typically lower, right? So Walmart falls under this category here. Product leadership. These are companies who own, I think, that tech space, right? They are creating products that are technologically advanced, they're superior, their product quality is what customers expect and desire. Like customers feel like they know when they're buying from these companies, they're getting a quality product. Okay, so product leadership is all about creating high quality products. Microsoft is probably falling and operating from a product leadership perspective. And then lastly, you have customer intimacy, which really focuses on the customer experience. These are companies that understand their customers, they offer an outstanding customer experience or excellent customer service, And I think, when I think of this, what company comes to mind for you?
Chick-fil-A.
I'm sorry?
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A. Great, I think that's a great example. Yeah, and I'm thinking what's in my rewards account right now for Chick-fil-A. I think Amazon's another one. Now, technically, I will say that companies, it would be great if they could do all three. But usually, because they're probably, like if you think about Amazon, they could potentially operate on all three pillars here. But usually the focus is on one. Okay. But ultimately, depending on like your resources inform your competitive advantage. So if we're going back to your SWOT analysis, your SWOT analysis informs your competitive advantage. Okay, where your value's at, what can you do better than anybody else, right? Better than any other competitor. So you've got an understanding of your resources that comes from your SWOT analysis that informs your competitive advantage and ultimately your operating decision, okay, or the strategy you're going to take that says we have a competitive advantage in this space and here's what we're going to do. Now your book talks about 4 general directions a company may take based on the SWOT analysis. So it all depends on the extent to which the company has a certain degree of strengths over weaknesses or opportunities and vice versa. So an aggressive situation is a growth strategy. This is a good thing. An aggressive situation is when a company has many internal strengths and in turn many external opportunities. This is where a company generally wants to be. Like, this is a good thing. And so again, I think of Apple when they created Apple iTunes, is that they saw the opportunity, they saw the strengths, they made their connection and made that happen. Okay, so firms that are performing well, like Google as well, oftentimes operate on growth strategies, and they are in an enviable position. A diversification strategy is when you have many internal strengths, but at the same time, many external threats. And so when we talk about diversification, remember we talked about new products, new products, new markets, right? It's this idea of operating in different industries with different product lines. And why is diversification a beneficial thing from a risk perspective? Steele, I feel like you can answer this one.
You say that again?
Why might having different products in different markets be beneficial from a risk perspective?
If you put all your eggs in one basket and that basket suddenly bursts into flames, you're kind of screwed.
Yes, so exactly, right? If you're operating with different products in different markets, if one tanks, your company hopefully should not tank, right? Like, you've got those other product lines to keep you afloat. And so that's what I wanted to bring in. You can review this. It's what we've already talked about with the product market growth matrix. But if you think about product life cycles, which we'll talk about later in this class in terms of the life cycle phase. So you have your introduction phase, your growth stage, your maturity phase, and then your decline stage. And depending on the scholar, you might have different names for the phases. But it's this idea of that products get introduced. They sometimes gradually get adopted. Sometimes they're quickly adopted. But there's this adoption phase or growth phase. Then at some point they start to plateau and level out. And then eventually sales will decline and go down. Or just kind of stop. Sales are in blue, and I did hearts for Valentine's Day because I was hoping we would be covering this before Saturday, but that didn't happen. And then green is the profit line. This company has what's considered an unbalanced portfolio. Again, if you think about these horizontal or vertical blocks, I should say, or columns, as stages in a product life cycle, this company has an unbalanced portfolio because all of its products are kind of in that maturity decline phase, right? They're all at the top there. A company over here that has a balanced portfolio is investing in new product development. It's creating new products targeted at new markets, and so it's got products spread across the different phases of the product life cycle. It's got some in the introduction phase, the growth phase, the maturity stage, and so forth. And this firm recognizes that products that are doing well today may not do well tomorrow or in a few years, right? Things change. If I can tell you one thing that's constant is customer needs change. The external environment changes. There are trends that will affect the performance of your products. And so this company recognizes that, but that way, if one product has a failure or is no longer successful, it's got other products that will back it up. So a balanced portfolio based on diversification is oftentimes a safer bet for larger companies. You'll have typically more even performance in those sort of diversified firms. So that's a diversification approach. A turnaround approach is when you have many internal weaknesses and many external opportunities. And so the problem is oftentimes you typically need to address the internal issues first, correct those, before you start to tackle opportunities. And I think of Twitter when I think of this, is you have to correct those internal issues before you can expand. Then lastly, you have defensive strategies. There are sometimes many internal weaknesses and many external threats, and you're, in this case, just trying to stay afloat. And so what will happen then is you might, in these sort of defensive positions, you might file for bankruptcy. That is a possibility. You might take a harvesting or deletion approach where you delete certain product lines, no longer sell them, or what you might do, if you think about Tab Soda. You guys know what Tab Soda is? Maybe if I show you a bottle. If you might remember this, maybe you remember a grandparent or your parent drinking it. It was kind of, this is the can that I remember. Coca-Cola owns this brand and followed a harvesting approach for a very long time, which means with a harvesting approach, you keep your product operating, you're selling it, but you're reducing all sorts of marketing and other additional costs, unnecessary costs. You basically pull those marketing resources from it, okay? And so Coke did this for a very, very long time. You didn't see commercials for Tab. And so very minimal marketing resources put into the product. And they did this before ultimately deleting the product because they had a loyal customer base that kind of kept them afloat for a while. So with that said, it's 12:15. I got to let you go. Enjoy this beautiful Monday. It looks like it's gorgeous outside. So have a great day, and I will see you on Wednesday.